Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Kelsey Norman. I'm a fellow for the Middle East and director of the Women's Rights, Human Rights, and Refugee program here at the Baker Institute for Public Policy. Last summer, the world witnessed the United States withdrawal from Afghanistan, one of the largest and most rapid humanitarian evacuation missions in U.S. history. This was a colossal effort requiring not just the support of the U.S. and other governments, but also private actors, non-governmental groups, including refugee resettlement agencies and veterans associations, as well as concerned citizens. The journey for Afghan evacuees has not been easy, as the majority of individuals were not flown directly to the United States, but rather were instead sent to overseas air bases in third countries. Some of them are still stuck on those U.S. bases in countries like the UAE, demonstrating that refugee resettlement is a long and arduous process. For those Afghans who did manage to come to the U.S., Texas has been leading resettlement efforts in the country, receiving almost 10,500 Afghan evacuees as of February 2022. In many ways, Texas is an ideal location to receive Afghan evacuees due to the scale of its existing resettlement infrastructure, as well as the presence of established Afghan communities, especially in Houston. In fact, Houston has received the largest number of Afghan evacuees, 5,117 individuals in total. Importantly, though, the arrival of Afghans, or any other refugees, in their new home still constitutes the beginning, rather than the end, of their resettlement journey. Once they have settled into their community, refugees still have to embark on an integration process that comes with its own subset of challenges, including finding employment, gaining access to and understanding how to engage with healthcare and education systems, learning a new language, and obtaining long-term resident status in the U.S. In order to examine the rapid 2021 evacuation mission, the subsequent resettlement process, and the integration of Afghan refugees in Houston and elsewhere, we're happy to welcome three panelists, Fahim Abed, Chloe Crane, and Kat Khosrowshahi. Fahim, yes, thank you. So Fahim Abed, joining us here on Zoom, was evacuated from Afghanistan in August 2021 and was until recently a reporter for the New York Times based in Kabul. Prior to joining the Times in 2016, he worked as a producer and reporter with Anadolu Agency, a Turkish state news agency, BBC World Service, and various local outlets in Afghanistan. He is a graduate of Kabul University and a 2019 alumnus of the East-West Center's Fellowship Program. He has been covering the conflict in Afghanistan for the past decade. Chloe Crane is Interfaith Ministry's Women's Empowerment Liaison. She's been running the Women's Empowerment Group program since 2016. This group supports refugee women from Arabic-speaking nations and Afghanistan in the U.S. and is designed to prevent isolation, build community, and equip refugee women with the information and skills that they need to thrive in their new life. Prior to her current role, Chloe was a TV producer for 10 years, working for the Associated Press, Al Jazeera, and BBC, among others. Based mainly in the Middle East, she worked on hard news, documentaries, and investigative programs, witnessing firsthand the plight that creates refugees. She has a degree in Arabic and Middle Eastern Studies. Kat Khosrowshahi is better known to be the first American-Iranian championing women's rights to play soccer, or football, in the Middle East, specifically in Iran. She is the first woman to receive the FIFA A license for coaching and was the head coach of the under-19 Iranian national team. Kat has a master's degree in chemical engineering from the University of Birmingham in the United Kingdom, and she's currently studying for her global affairs at Rice University for her second master's. She believes that soccer can be used as a diplomatic tool to bridge her two countries together and to pave the path for the next generation of female athletes. So first, we're going to hear remarks from our three panelists, about 10 minutes each, and then we'll have a discussion that I'll be moderating, and then we'll open it up for audience questions from all of you. So let's please give one more warm welcome for our three panelists. Okay, so Kat, if you want to lead us off. And you're welcome, to just sit there. Thank you.
Okay. Can you all hear me if I sit back here? Perfect. I'm Kat, and you all are probably wondering, what is an Iranian American doing in a conversation about Afghanistan? Well, soccer brings the world a lot closer than you may think. I had the privilege and honor to actually coach the Iran national team, where once I played against the Afghan women's national team. There, I met the captain. Her name is Farhunda Muhtaj. She's Canadian American, and we both were sitting in the stands. And she was looking at me, I was looking at her, and we had a lot of similarities. I was trying to speak Farsi, because Farsi is also spoken in most parts of Afghanistan. She was like, "You have a really bad Farsi accent." I'm like, so do you. And she's like, "No, I mean, I'm Canadian Afghan. You can't be just from Iran." And that's where we bonded. And, we exchanged numbers. We always stayed in touch when she came back to Canada and I came back to the U.S. And, whenever this situation, this horrific situation happened, I decided to give her a call. Called her up and I was like, "Farhunda, what is going on? What's happening with your national team? Because I'm sure the Taliban is not happy that women play soccer." And all of a sudden, I just hear her cry. She said that the Taliban has already listed the players, my teammates, on their list of going after as a hit list. I don't know what that means because I've never been in that situation. All I know is I have red alert going on in my head. I've never been a part of a rescue mission in my life. I am just a student at the moment, but also, former national team coach of Iran. One thing led to another. She's like, "Kat, you're the only person I know and trust. You are in the U.S. Is there any way that you can help me get the national team out?" Me being who I am, I'm like, of course we're going to do this. We're going to figure out a way. I'm living in Texas, and I'm sure there's going to be a big group of people who want and are willing to help. I call, my sister. My sister calls, Joanne King Herring. I don't know if you guys know her, but Joanne, she became very famous for her work in Afghanistan about 4 decades ago. And, Vicky Hollip actually got involved as well. And for those of you who don't know Vicky Hollip, she is the only female CEO of a big oil and gas company, Occidental. So here we are, 4 women, 2 Iranian Americans, and a lady from Alabama and a lady from Texas. We got together, we were brainstorming ideas, how do we get these girls out of Afghanistan? Now, I've never been a part of an operation, let alone a rescue operation, and I will not take credit for this rescue mission, but I will take credit for making the very first call. One thing led to another. We had to organize the girls. Now, these girls are all, sorry. We had to organize these girls to come into a central hub. Now, how, you may ask, were we able to even communicate with all of these girls? It was through WhatsApp. WhatsApp. I mean, the technology side of this operation was what saved these girls. We started, these WhatsApp groups. We had 3 different groups, which each group had about 50 players, including their family members. And within those groups, we were able to communicate with them where to be, at what time, and how to be there. Now, we thought it was going to be easy peasy. We thought it was going to be going into Kabul airport, getting on a plane, the U.S. Marines are going to say, "Welcome on board," and, done, finished, coming to the U.S. No, definitely not. The girls were in those lines for 4 or 5 days, no food, no access to any form of sanitary products, no access to water. And I'm still not certain if this is the reason why, but the day that the girls were supposed to enter the airport is whenever the bomb went off and 13 of our Marines were killed. And they will not tell us if it was because of the soccer players. They said that it was more important that these soccer players find safety, and that just shows the sacrifice that these individuals are making. But the Kabul airport was completely blocked. We were not able to go from there anymore. And, the girls were just constantly communicating to what's next. Now, the operation mission was all done through a group called Deliver Fund and technology. a group called Deliver Fund, where they do rescue missions all over the world, but mainly for trafficking. So they were very well aware of what to do, how to do it. They had boots on the ground. They had the technology of how to get the girls out. But the mission it took a long time. It was 24 hours staying awake, a lot of coffee. And mind you, I didn't drink that much coffee before, but I invested in an espresso machine and it helped. So thank God for Nespresso there. No, I'm not marketing on behalf of them. But 24 hours staying awake, trying to get the girls from one point to another. The girls were constantly, they had their video on WhatsApp. So it was live interaction at all times. If anyone ever needed anything, we were there. Zoom thankfully worked. So we had, daily yoga sessions just to, relax the nerves, and also daily meetings about what are we going to do next. Now, as someone who was new in an operation mission, we were not allowed to tell what was happening at that moment, or giving them too long of an idea about might have happened, because we didn't know who was listening, or if there was chitter chatter amongst the girls, and if they were telling their neighbors that their neighbors, I don't know, for God forbid, they were Taliban members. We didn't know. So we just kept telling the girls the second we knew something, move to this address right now. They would all get in cars, find taxis, find motorcycles to get to that point. Then they would have to camp there for 5-6 days, because we were waiting to see if the U.S. soldiers were able to bring them out. Didn't happen. Now, again, okay, move to this other address. Still didn't happen. We made them move at least 6 to 7 times to different addresses away from their home with absolutely nothing with them. But this was the only way to get them out. Finally, we brought them to a place called Mazar Shah, which is on the border with Uzbekistan. And we were trying our best to negotiate with the Uzbeki government to allow them to enter. What do you think the answer was? Absolutely no. They did not want anybody coming in, whether their life was threatened, whether they were national team athletes, whether they were women who were, under the threat of being killed. They did not care. Qatar, on the other hand, they are hosting the World Cup. They do not have a women's national team, and we did our best. And this is where Vicky Holub comes in. Vicky Holub casually calls the Emir and is like, Mr. Emir, you do not have a national team. Why don't you adopt these girls? It will be really good for your image, really good for, the fact that so many migrant workers have been killed building your stadiums. Bring them over. He said no. So Vicky Holub, what does she do? She gives $400,000 and her plane to come to the border between Uzbekistan and Afghanistan to get the girls on that plane. Then they go to a third-party country, and they end up coming to Portugal. Now, Portugal, if you don't know much about that country, besides its food, it's the home of Cristiano Ronaldo, the king of soccer. And what better place than to be there? Because these girls eventually want to be able to play soccer, play something that they love, play, a sport that, gives them that prestige, that confidence, because it's just more than a sport. Trust me, I played on the Iran national team, and when I first moved to Iran as a 17-year-old, it was illegal to play soccer. So for now that, soccer has started, we have a say-so in the country. So I knew the importance of having soccer enabled in your country. Now, these girls, they're all in Afghanistan. Fortunately, they're all safe. They're all, they've continued their soccer dreams. The captain that I spoke with originally from Canada, she goes there, travels there often, provides them whatever they may need. And, that is, where my story kind of starts with the youth national team. So thank you so much for all coming here and listening to, our stories and, where we may all be able to connect and, help each other. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kat. We'll pick up we have more questions, I'm sure, for Kat, both during the discussion and the Q&A about where the girls are and how they're doing now. But we'll move on now to Fahim, if you want to share your remarks.
Sure. Our journey started when everything was very normal. Everything was, the country was collapsing, the district were collapsing one after another. But For us, like it was a part of the coverage of war in Afghanistan, and on 15th of August, I came to office as a normal day. I thought like there is no problem, everything is fine. But the moment I entered the office, I received a message from one of my friends who said, the Taliban are in the city. And I said, no way. But yeah, that was the reality. And when I entered to the office, I noticed that my colleagues were grabbing their stuff and they were preparing to leave. And I asked like what was the plan for us and what was going to happen. They said like just have your family somewhere close to the airport. So I had only like a few dollars in my pocket, and I didn't know how to like I didn't expected the situation. So I rushed to the bank, but I was very late because everyone else was also in the bank, and there was like hundreds of thousands of people. So I couldn't get any money from the bank, and I asked my family to come to somewhere close to the airport. And then as soon as I meet my family, I received another call from my security colleagues, and they said like, just go to the airport. So we entered to the airport. The security of airport was with the zero units, the special Afghan special forces, and everything seemed to be fine. But they haven't checked our passports, they haven't checked any documents, and they just let us go inside. We have got some letters that showed that we had a chartered aircraft waiting for us and all those stuff, but no one asked about anything. So we went to the airport and we wait for a while. Then I and some 40 of my other colleagues and their family members were told that we should take this flight to Ukraine. I talked with one of the crew members, and so we made our way toward the terminal. So as it was an international flight, so I was going toward the international terminal. And I noticed that the security personnel of the airport start running toward the aircraft, and they said like, we should take one of these flights and leave the country. So I communicate with the crew member, and she asked me to come to domestic flights. And then we came and meet up there. We were waiting. And then she told me that we can go inside. We went to the airport, and so the first bus took the crew members, and she remained. She said like, we will all go together. When the second bus comes, so I took 20 of my colleagues and their family members, and I asked one of my colleagues to just keep an eye on this girl. So when I reached the aircraft, I saw this girl was on the stairs, and she was climbing to the aircraft. And I said, oh God, like things are not working. As soon as she entered to the aircraft, they pushed back the stairs from the aircraft. And the pilot told me there was an emergency in the airport. And at that moment, there was like a lot of people inside the airport, and they were rushing to any flight. So they just start pushing back, and the aircraft took off, and we were not able to get. Then we spent the night in the airport in a parking lot with like 30 or like 35 children, no water, no food. And that was a difficult night until the morning. And we had several babies in the group. We ran out of milk and hot water and cold water. So we start looking for water, and I was awake all the night. So I received calls from my colleagues in the New York Times in New York, like the director of international desk. And then I received a call from Pentagon. And every minute we would be told that a group of special forces or US commandos or British commandos will come and pick you up. But we just wait until the morning. And in the morning, we have been told to try to cross to the military side of the airport. So basically, the reason for the chaos in Kabul airport was that it has got two sides, a military side and a civilian side. The poor management of American Marines and security forces was that they only secured the military part, and the civilian part of the airport was open. So that's why all these hundreds of thousands of people were able to come and enter the airport. And once you entered the airport, you could cross to the military side. So that was the reason for chaos. And then American forces were trying to push back all these people. And so we spent another day under the heat of sun and without any water and any food. And toward the evening, the Taliban fighters entered to the airport, and we were sitting in a corner in the military side, and they just came there and opened fire on us. Luckily, no one was wounded or killed. And then at that moment, we decided that we will just cross the runway, and we were in contact with American Marines, and we had all this big plan that like we will have two girls with red dresses in front of the line, and they will be crossing, and then we will be following them. But there was like the moment we tried to enter to the to the military airport, there was like hundreds of thousands of people who all came, and they were trying to cross the runway and get to a flight. So there was a big chaos, and then Taliban entered to that area as well, and they were kind of cooperating with American forces, and they start like beating everyone they see, and they attack our group because we were more organized. Like we had all these male members around women and children to protect them from the mob. And they started hating us with plastic pipes and sticks, so that like they hate me 2-3 times. And I tried to tell them that we have got women and children, and we were expecting to be evacuated, but that didn't work. And we just basically were forced to leave the airport, and we left behind all our bags and memories and documents and most of the things. And because everyone was trying to leave the airport because Taliban were beating them so badly, and then the Taliban blocked the exit. Only one person at a time was able to cross the exit. So like then they would beat people there. That was a nightmare. We were stuck among like hundreds of people for several hours, and then eventually we left the airport, and I wasn't able to go to my own apartment, so I went to my mother-in-law. And along the way, my wife was only crying and praying that things will be fine. And then we reached there, and we like with fear, we spent 2-3 nights, and after that, with the help of Qataris, we went to the Qatari embassy in Kabul, and then to the Kabul airport with buses, and then we met Marines, and they took us to the military side of the airport, and eventually we left to Doha, and then to Mexico, and we end up in Houston. And after that, like I was a team leader for all of our families, more than 120 people, and we tried to help each other and resettle. And the struggle for most of the people started there because they were safe, but they were in a country that they didn't know the language. They were provided a 2-year visa that they didn't know it would be extended or not. And like, it was a limbo situation for most of us. I have got a job in Pittsburgh in Tribune Review, a local newspaper here. And most of us are working now, but we have no idea about like what will happen, how our cases will be processed. The New York Times has and the Catholic Charities, they have hired a team and like preparing our asylum application and those stuff, which will take a lot of time. But like in other cases, like Iraq and other countries, there was a special situation, and these evacuees were provided documents in a shorter time. But immigration is very difficult. It's not easy. Like my father, during the civil wars, we went to Pakistan, and he only spent 1 week there. and he was back. I said, why? Like, I would always blame him. But when I become a migrant, I can understand him. It's a very difficult and challenging process. And now, with because of the situation in Ukraine and all that tension going there, so Afghans who are living across the U.S. And in different cities, and especially in Houston, they have they're not resettled yet, and they're dealing with a lot of issues. Then, yeah.
Thank you so much, Fahim. I'm sure we'll come back to if you can maybe elaborate on some of the challenges and issues that you and some of your colleagues have been facing since coming to the U.S. Now, though, we're going to hear from Chloe for just a few minutes about her work with Interfaith Ministries.
Sure. Well, thank you everyone for coming this evening and for giving us the opportunity to share about the families we work with, the families we serve, and the women that we serve. So as you've heard, I run the Women's Empowerment Group for Interfaith Ministries. And just going to sort of rewind a bit, you touched on my previous career. So I was a TV producer for about 10 years in the Middle East. And during that time, I saw some of the horror that humanity can throw at itself, some of the horror that causes refugees. And when I moved to Houston, I saw I had an opportunity to start to give back to those communities that I had seen suffering so much out in the field. So I started volunteering, like I'm sure many of you who are here tonight, volunteering with refugee women and refugee families here in Houston. And during that time, it really quickly became obvious that refugee women in particular are not thriving. And I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that. And we see a really high rate of practical success, as Fahim referred to. People find jobs within about 6 months. We have about a 94% success rate at our agency, which is amazing when you think people arrive with carrier bags of belonging and just the clothes on their back. And within 3 to 6 months, they're able to support themselves. On a basic level, we are talking apartments, food on their plates, utilities paid. On a basic level, they support themselves. But refugee women are often not thriving. We have, I'll talk more about some of the reasons for that coming up in the questions. But we have set up the Women's Empowerment Group program to focus on women specifically, to support them as they adjust to life here in the US. And we have 3 main pillars of the Women's Empowerment Group. The first pillar is community building. We help the women connect to rebuild that big spiderweb network of community that they lost when they fled their home countries. Refugee women in particular are at risk of alienation, isolation, and all the social ills that come with that: depression, loneliness, and increased anxiety, and significantly not reaching their full potential. If you're isolated, you're also at increased risk of domestic violence. So the first pillar of our group is to community build for the women, and that includes meeting volunteers. It's almost impossible for refugees to meet Americans, to meet Houstonians, and to have any kind of a meaningful relationship with them. And our women's empowerment groups are one of the few places that can happen. Our second pillar is information sharing. We bring speakers in and presenters from partner organizations to share information with the women, which is translated into their own language. We take a magazine-style approach to the information. It's not overwhelming, but it's interesting enough, and you take a lot away from it. And we'll cover everything from breast cancer awareness. What is a mammogram? If you've never had a mammogram before, it can be very scary. Cottage food industry laws. What can you legally make and sell from your home to bring in some extra revenue for your family? We just partnered with the ID Theft Center to do a presentation on identity theft and popular scams. If you're a refugee, you're very vulnerable to these kind of things. So we cover every week a different topic, bringing a lot of information to the women. And the third pillar of our women's empowerment group is advocacy. And this is really, really important. We are a place that women can turn to. There's been studies into the distinction between perceived support and received support in terms of sort of recovering from disasters. So our women's empowerment group really supports the mental health of the women by being perceived support as well as received support. So I think I'll leave it there and hopefully can dive in with some more information in the other questions.
Okay, sounds great. So I'm going to ask some sort of targeted questions directed at each one of you, but if anyone else has things to add, feel free to jump in. It can be just very much a dialogue and a discussion. So Kat, starting with you, if you could maybe just elaborate a bit, I guess, I thought it was so fascinating, your story, because I think we had this real perception at the time that the 2-week period when we were all glued to understanding what was exactly going on at Kabul airport, I think that we had this perception that the U.S. government and the U.S. military were the main interlocutors in carrying out so much of the evacuation mission, but I think your story is a testament to just how many private actors and individual citizens had to be involved to get people out of the country, right? So I think if you could just maybe, I guess, elaborate on how many people were involved, what was the hardest part of it. I think you call it Operation Soccer Balls, right?
Yes. Yes.
If you could just elaborate a bit further.
This is actually a trademark term that the White House started. Initially, the White House, along with Deliver Fund, which was the group that helped with the rescue mission, they had the permission, the visas, the red carpet out for these girls to be able to get on a U.S. Air Force plane and bring them to the United States. That all went downhill the day of the bombing that happened at the airports. When that happened, everybody was just packing and leaving as fast as possible. So here we are. Another person that was heavily involved with the rescue mission was Logan. I'm sure you all know her. She was the one who was giving us information about that, no one's going to be helping us right now from the government side. It's only going to be people that have money and have planes and are willing to give their money and planes to actually evacuate very sensitive individuals that will be, they're on the target list. So to be very fair and honest about this, whenever the explosion did happen at the airport, we did not get any further support from the U.S. government. It was all private individuals. Like I mentioned, Vicky Holleb. Also, we had a large group from various countries that were pouring in help from Germany, from Portugal, from Spain. These were all, soccer lovers. These were all, professional players that, they get the mega millions. So for them to give just a little bit went a lot for us. We had, some of the top players of the world, give us something. They gave us just enough to be able to, help with the girls' survival, as well as to help fund for their food and their accommodations, because they were going from house to house to house. But it was all private sectors that were helping us. I mean, at the end, it was Vicky Holleb's plane that got the girls out. It was her own funds, not from Occidental's funds, that helped bring the girls out. So ultimately speaking, it was a big contribution from individuals who cared enough. It was difficult to get people to care for these young athletes, but at the end, we made it work. And there was no amount. The negotiation, it wasn't negotiation at the end. It was pure begging, on my knees, just begging to get them to care, to be honest.
And I think that also the sort of, Fahim used the word chaos at the airport, and I think the chaos of the general evacuation mission and just the rapidness with which it had to occur, and your story again, Kat, is a testament to that. But I think that also then plays into some of the legal challenges that Afghan refugees, and we're calling them refugees, but most of them don't actually have refugee status. So maybe both Fahim and Chloe could speak to some of the challenges that Afghans have faced once they actually did, for those who did arrive in the United States, they've either had to look for avenues via asylum process, which I think, Fahim, you mentioned in your remarks, or they've had to look for sort of alternative legal pathways. So maybe, Fahim, if you want to speak first, and Chloe, if you can add to that.
Sure. So the problem with like when you leave your home and you are immigrated, so like you lost everything, and then you don't know if you will have the right to keep living in this country or not. Like, think about building your life and then have this worry that, okay, my visa expires in a year, so what's gonna happen? And like if you're applying for a job and like if you have only 6 months on your visa, that's another issue. And we as Afghan, we like 95% of these people who were evacuated in my group, they spend their whole life in a single house. We are, Afghanistan is an unstable country, but we are very much used to this stability. And now, like, when we start talking about the asylum process and about the lawyers and about the interviews, like many of our colleagues, our former colleagues would say like, okay, we should get prepared to leave, or like we should make contacts back home and see how is the situation, can we go there or not, because maybe our asylum application won't be accepted or won't be approved. So like this immigration and resettlement is very much stressful. And on top of that, if you need to worry about your asylum application and if it will be accepted or not, and if you would be allowed to stay in this country or not, and when you don't have the option to go back, because the asylum, the resettlement and being a refugee is so hard that many times you deeply wish that you could have go back home and just live there. Like no matter what would be the consequences, but if you could go back, because for us, everything is very new in this country and it takes a lot of time to understand. And the agencies, because of today, I read an article about it, that during the Trump administration, all refugee agencies were downsized and they were not prepared for resettling this big number of Afghan refugees. And that's why there were a lot of gaps. And like many of these refugees, they don't have very essential documents or things that they need as someone living in the US. For example, in my team there and in Afghans I meet in Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, they don't have a driving license, and it takes them 2 hours to 3 hours to go to a job and 2 hours to 3 hours to come back. So they spend 4 to 6 hours only driving back and forth between their job, and 8 hours they work. And you know that a starting salary for a refugee is what? So like, this is a very big challenge, and I think it needs to be addressed, because there are not very less people. Like we are talking about 100,000 people. So if they can't speak the language, the agency should have provided like enough support at that time. Or like if they needed a driving license, like they should have taught about how to do that. That many of them has no idea how to get like a driving license or how to do things. We were very lucky, our group, and the New York Times did a huge work. Like we didn't face these problems, but many other Afghans that I meet these days in Pittsburgh, they have got a lot of problems. Even some of them, when they were living in the hotel, they were told that the agency hasn't got any more budget to pay for your hotel rent, and you should pay your own expenses after that. And these guys haven't got a job. They have been living in the hotels and bases for past 8 months. And on top of that, this this thing from the agencies that they won't be paying because they haven't got enough budget. And like about the credit scores, most of these refugees has no idea about that. But if you are renting a house in the US, they will look into your credit score, and if it's very bad, they won't give you a house. So all these things needs to be paid attention to, and the government needs to take action and to rescue Afghans from this limbo situation, because those who got SIV, they're in a good situation, but those who haven't got that, they're always worried about. Like it's already been a year, so like they have got only a year of parole, and after that, what's gonna happen with them and how they gonna do? And then we have these people that they have left their families back home, like they have left their children, they have left their wives, and for them it will take a very long time to be united again.
Thank you so much, Fahim. Chloe, do you want to elaborate maybe a bit about the SIV program versus the parolee program? I think that might, for those who are not familiar.
I'm just going to jump in. Fahim, thanks for highlighting all of that. I think what both of your stories highlight really well when you're talking about it is the speed of the fall of Kabul and the fall of Afghanistan caught everybody by surprise. And that includes the refugee resettlement agencies here in the US. They didn't expect a massive humanitarian crisis that would involve tens of thousands of people needing to be resettled here in the US within a few short weeks, basically. Nobody expected that. And you have to remember that this, as Fahim referred to, comes on the heels of 4 years of grinding down of the US refugee admissions program under the former administration. So in 2020, for example, we saw just 11,814 refugees allowed into America. Just that many, okay? Fast forward to August and September. So the refugee agencies had to respond very quickly to this massive humanitarian crisis, and their awareness that they were going to have, a sort of like a historic number of evacuees moved in that they would have to resettle. So I'm happy to say that here in Houston, what we saw was really strong cross-agency collaboration really quickly. They started raising funds through the Houston Afghan Resettlement, it's called HARC, Houston Afghan Resettlement Collaboration. And they started raising funds because they knew that they would need funds for basic things, food, accommodation, all of the things that Fahim is talking about. And part of the reason it's important is, again, most of the Afghans that were brought into America are not refugees. They're what we call parolees. And it means they're brought in on this term humanitarian parole. It means they are given a temporary legal status, a temporary legal residency here for two years usually. And within that 2 years, they need to adjust that status to a permanent immigration status. And that is what Fahim is talking about. So that means people have gone through all of this trauma and they get here and they still can't be safe because they don't have that permanent immigration status. And the agencies have been raising additional funds to support with that legal process, but it's coming just a little bit behind. But the reason that was so important early on is because initially, parolees were not entitled to any of the benefits or rights or services that refugees are. So the agencies didn't know where the funding was going to come from to be supporting this massive influx of Afghans that they were trying to help. And what you've seen, as I mentioned, we've had this sort of grinding down of the refugee program here. You've seen all of the agencies in Houston massively expand and increase capacity really quickly. So from August until now, for example, Interfaith Ministries Refugee Services has tripled in size. to be able to support and accommodate the sheer number of people that we have on our books. And we've helped 1,380 individuals, Afghan individuals, to resettle. But the process is ongoing. When you talk about rebuilding your life, as Fahim has said, that term goes nowhere near describing what it means. You just have to imagine being plucked from everything you know and love and dropped in a country where you don't speak the language, and you have to do absolutely everything from scratch. So the refugee resettlement agencies are supporting with that process, but it is incredibly, incredibly difficult. Just one last point for him. We cover driving in our women's empowerment group. Just saying, I get my ladies signed up as quick as we can.
And just to add quickly, there is an act before Congress to actually, it's called the Afghan Adjustment Act, and this would solve the legal problem that Afghans are facing, in that it would provide that long-term legal pathway to permanent residence here, rather than having to go through the individual asylum system, which, as Fahim said, Afghans might not even end up qualifying for individual asylum. They'd have to show that they were personally being persecuted by the Taliban, which many of them might not have the documents to verify. So this is something that, you know, if you're looking for a way to help, you can get on the phone with your Congress people and push for that.
Can I just jump in? That humanitarian parole does have a really important purpose, though. It's what you use when you need to scoop up a whole bunch of people and get them out as quickly as possible because they're at risk. So there's a reason for it, and you don't have time to process all their paperwork. So it's got a very important purpose in our law, but it's insufficient for what's going on now.
That's a great rejoinder. Okay, I'm just going to ask a quick question to each of you that you can answer, and then we'll open it up to the Q&A. So I'll roll off with questions, and you could each go in turn responding. So Kat, I was just hoping maybe you could update us with how the girls are doing in Portugal. Do they have access to long-term residency there? What are they planning? Are they going to stay in Portugal, go elsewhere? And then for Fahim, if you want to go after, maybe you could just speak about how you're feeling about your prospects for staying in the U.S. Sorry, you're here on the screen and you're up there too, and I don't know which one to look at. If you could just speak about how you're feeling and how you know your other Afghans you know in the U.S., how they're feeling, whether they're hopeful or what they're thinking about their long-term prospects in the U.S. And then Chloe, if you could just speak a little bit about women, and if anyone here is interested in helping, what are ways to support Afghan women in Houston? So we'll go in the same order as the speakers.
Okay, so where to begin with this one? Because you know, you're coming from Afghanistan. Although Portugal does have great capacity for developing your soccer skills, it's a whole different world from what you even know. The girls, instead of learning English, they have to learn Portuguese. They have to learn how to cook Portuguese food. They have to learn Portuguese culture, and I'm sure it's very beautiful, but it's nothing that they even knew, nothing that they even envisioned. All of them were promised to come to the U.S. At least they have some familiarity with Americans, and what better than being a part of the American dream? This is what they all thought they were going to get. They are having a hard time being able to settle there, because it's just being in the two main cities, Lisbon and Porto, is very expensive for the Portuguese government to help them adapt. So they have to go to the outskirts. And I don't know if you've been to the outskirts of most European countries. It is the outskirts. It's very different from being in the main cities. So but these girls, once a month, they come, they gather together, they do their training session with their coach, which is the girl I spoke to about initially, Farhunda Mutaj, the captain of the women's national team. And they are now entering the league, so they are able to play in the league there. But one big point out of all of this is that initially these girls, these young 13, 14-year-old girls, were going to be leaving Afghanistan without their families. We were able to do something to make sure that at least one parent, if not both parents, could come with them. And that happened, thank God. So Portugal, although it is not what they exactly wanted, It's much better than Afghanistan, and we are working around the clock to see if they have family members in other parts of Europe. Maybe they could resettle there. It's a long-term process, a long-term problem, and we're doing our best to accommodate what they want. But overall, I think it's a good change. It's a good place to be for now, and they're safe, which is the most important aspect of all of this, and they're doing what they love, which is playing soccer without having a target on their back.
Fahim?
Our team, as I said before, the Times has provided massive support to everyone, almost everyone in our team, and but some of our guys are still struggling, and for some of the team members, it's difficult because they haven't got relatives and friends in Houston, and we were brought to Houston. We didn't have another option. So many people are moving again to other states, and they need to start again there, which is again a big struggle. And if they're moving for work, that's completely different, which I did. That like now I'm living in a place that I don't know anyone, no one around me. So that's a huge, a completely different story. But as Kate said, we are safe, and we are in the land of opportunities. So if we work hard enough, we will get to the point that we expect. But the main problem is for those who can't speak the language and who haven't got education and who haven't got a skill to find a job. So and we have unfortunately many members in our team that they struggle, and the resettlement process is very stressful. You are worried all the time, and you don't know why. You have a job, you have a shelter, you have food, but still you are worried. So if they have barriers like language, like driving license, I would put it as a barrier. So then it's very difficult. I heard like one of our former colleagues quit his job because he didn't got a driving license. So he was not able to attend a job after the agency stopped supporting them for taxi or like for transportation. So that's difficult, but they will need to find a way to understand this and to solve this issue, but that would need some support.
Thank you so much, Fahim. Chloe?
Thanks, Fahim. I'm just going to sort of follow a little bit on what you're saying, and to talk about what we see as the reasons that refugee women in particular are not thriving. Why are they not doing well here? And I'm just going to sort of highlight some of the reasons, because it ties into sort of volunteering and what you can do to help. So I mentioned that refugee women are at risk of alienation and isolation and those things earlier on. But why? For example, they may have young children, and they may be at home all day by themselves with young children, with husbands working double shifts or long hours, traveling to a job that they never see. It's extremely, extremely isolating. Maybe they're older, maybe they have grown kids working long hours that they never see. They probably do not speak English. So that means they don't have the opportunity to advocate for themselves, to search out opportunities for their families. The speed of the withdrawal from Afghanistan left people no time for psychological preparation. They were not in a refugee camp for a couple of years processing everything that they've been through. So for our Afghan women, a lot of them have PTSD, plain grief for having said goodbye to people or lost people, and a whole bunch of sort of anxiety issues. Being on your own all day with those is not healthy for anybody. And in addition, they may not have the cultural confidence to get out and go and explore the city by themselves. And again, if you project yourself into this situation, how many of you, if you didn't speak the language and had just been dropped in a country, would feel like going out by yourself and exploring the city? Pretty much none of us. It's easier when there's someone with you, when there's someone guiding you. So those are just a sort of few of the reasons that Afghan women and refugee women can be struggling. But just quickly, Afghan women have the additional challenge, and it's huge, that the literacy rate in Afghanistan is hovering at about 30%. So that means about 70% of the women that we serve cannot read or write in their own language. They were denied the opportunity to learn that. So if you or I need to look any information up, we just look it up online. Afghan women often do not have that privilege. So that means reliable information is really important for them. And often it's husbands who speak English, not always, but it's often the husbands that speak English. So that means you have to hope that they've got a really strong relationship. And as we all know, relationships have ups and downs. So there's a few reasons that refugee women are in a vulnerable situation and struggling with what's going on. I could list many more. How do you help? What do you do? There are many, many, many ways to get in and support the refugee community. And, we appreciate any time that anyone can give, a big amount of time or a small amount of time. It makes just such a giant, tremendous difference in the lives of the people that we serve. And I see this on a daily basis. So the best thing that you can do if you are interested in helping refugees and parolees is to sign up to the Volunteer Houston portal. So Volunteer Houston is a program of interfaith ministries that matches volunteers and groups and individuals with non-profit organizations, and our volunteer opportunities with refugee services are listed there. If specifically you're interested in getting involved with the Women's Empowerment Group program, please reach out to me. My email is ccrane, Krane, at imgh.org, and I would be more than happy to support you to help some of the people in our community who are struggling. But I would say the biggest thing that you can do is get to know Afghan people, get to know them as friends, pop over, have a cup of tea with them, and start to invite them into your life. That it's not a volunteer opportunity, but it makes such a difference just having a friend.
Thank you so much, Chloe.
Thanks.
Okay. So now we'll go ahead and open it up for the Q&A. I believe this room is adequately mic'd, so I think you can actually just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Yes. Thank you.
So the kids that come over, often they learn the language faster than their parents. What are the challenges for parents and their kids with the cultural difference that kids may adjust a little faster than their parents?
I absolutely love this question. Can I?
Do you want to? Fahim, could you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure. Great, please go ahead. And anyone feel free to answer.
So it's one of the things that we see, in a lot of the families we work with, and this is a generalization and a stereotype, but I'm going to make it anyways, quite often quite a patriarchal structure in the family. You've got dad at the top, you've got mum in the middle, and you've got kids on the bottom of the pyramid. And what we see is the minute the kids can speak English and mum can't speak English, for example, she gets pushed down to the bottom row. It's like, Mum, you don't understand this. You don't understand this, Mum. Let me navigate this adult theme for you. So what you see is that the mums quickly lose the ability to place appropriate boundaries on the kids, but in addition, they are completely unempowered through the process. And there's also, if dad doesn't speak English, there's a risk that dad can feel sort of dethroned, if that makes sense, from that position. And that has all kind of risks associated with it. So when the kids learn English very quickly, it has an impact on the family structure. when the adults are not learning English as quickly. I just really want to stress generalizations are useful, but they don't tell every story. You have to get to know the families that you're working with and the families that you are getting to know, because their situation may be very, very different.
Thank you. Yes.
Do you have, and this is probably for Chloe or maybe for Kat, but do you have any resources for summer activities for the school-age children?
Okay, so with the young ladies that are in Portugal, I have set up 2 tournaments for them, which I will be going there myself, and I will be coaching them to prepare them for a tournament in Sweden and in Norway. So those are the summer activities that we have for them. Aside from that, we have Portuguese lessons and English lessons, and we also one thing that I do for the moms, I've taken them on shopping sprees, and they've loved it because they have left their heels, their dresses, their homes. And if you know women from Afghanistan, you know that they love to dress up, and the makeup and the dresses and the heels and the music and the dancing, just like all of us, but they really love it. So I make sure that for the moms, they also have, mom weekend off, and, try to do some trips with just them. So this will actually, I've noticed it has helped them a lot to be a little bit more emotionally, bring them back to center them a little bit more. But during the summer for the girls, it's just soccer camps, and for the moms, something very different.
How about here in Houston?
Yeah, so we're partnering with St. John's to run a 2-week summer camp in person from 8 through to 3. So that'll be a mix of fun and academics. And it's free, and transport is provided from certain locations. But if you are working with humanitarian parolee clients, most of those kids will probably be kept back for summer school. So when you're looking at setting up summer camps for them, you have to be really careful that the timing doesn't overlap with when the kids will be held back to get their learning level up. If you shoot me an email, I can send you a list of other camps that are being run in Houston.
Maybe you two can talk a little bit further afterwards.
Can I just?
Oh, yeah.
Sure. Hi. My name is Elena Corbett, and I'm the Executive Director of CARE, which works with refugee kids here in Houston. So I thought it would be a great way for me to share some of these resources. Chloe and I have co-founded the Women's Empowerment Group back in 2016 at Interfaith Ministries. And there are so many resources, and we really need volunteers that mentor refugee kids. And now is the perfect time to do it because we have this huge influx of refugee kids. I was at one of our sites earlier today, it was at Wisdom High School, and it's amazing the difference that volunteers can make. So some of them will show up on their lunch break, and they will spend time with our kids working on their homework. Other volunteers will go and participate in the after-school activities. But the whole point is exactly what Chloe mentioned, is that connection to the community. Because kids, they just gravitate to new information, and they absorb that information so quickly, and then they get to share that information with their parents and their neighbors, and the amount of progress that they make is absolutely incredible. I spoke to a couple of our girls who arrived 7 months ago, and they're fluent in English by now. They're at that age, if you learn the language before you were 11, you can pick up the accent of the country, and so they sound just like regular kids here in the U.S. So I do encourage you to look at the resources that are presented today, the list of agencies, and do feel free to reach out to PAIR, which stands for Partnership for the Advancement and Immersion of Refugees, and we'll gladly utilize all of the support, whether it's volunteers or supporting scholarships. I'll share one quick story today. So one of our 17-year-old.
Can't hear you.
We can't.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's right.
Sorry.
Looks like we did need a mic.
Kelsey, if that's all right.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Stand up. Or
I'm sorry, that's as loud as it's going to get today.
Mary, I can
But I'll
connect
be
you.
happy to,
I can connect you with
share
Elena.
my business cards with you, and you can ask me any questions if you like.
Thank you so much for sharing. We'll be sure to share some resources, further resources after this event. Other questions? Yes?
Yeah, I'm interested to know about women, particularly being empowered and able to drive, especially women from Afghanistan who've never driven before, always been driven by men, and great to get a driving license. But then, how do you get a car? Is thing one. And thing two, I mean, that's a very Houston-oriented question for Afghan women in Houston. It's just very, very important, not just for them, but their families, but also for Fahim, who's in Pennsylvania. What can we do to help you? I mean, you're stuck there, and we're here in Houston, and this is a very Houston-oriented discussion on what we can do to help in Houston. But I'm sure there are people here in the audience who'd love to help you. So, twofold question.
Great, thank you.
Fahim, do you want to go first?
Yes, I will go first. Thank you so much for the offer for help, but I'm good. I've got a job, but there are a lot of people in Houston who need your help, especially those who are not familiar with the culture, and they don't know many people around. So if you have an Afghan in your neighborhood, so I will just explain a short example of my wife's communicating with the neighbors here. So my wife is very good at cooking, and she's bored at home because she's all day at home, and we are still working on her English skills and going through the driving applications to sort it out, and then she can have a permit, and so she can start learning driving. So she takes up a plate of food every evening to one of our neighbors who is just laughing and talking to her and trying to communicate. And she's doing that every evening. She's not skipping it at all. And I'm sure that is the most favorite time of the day for her. So there are a lot of Afghans there, and they need a hand, they need a smile, they need you can invite them to your house, or you can go. Afghans are very hospitable. They will be more than happy to host you in their home for a glass of tea, or for a lunch. So that will mean a lot, and that will ease the stress and worry of resettlement.
Thank you, Fahim. Chloe, did you want to add to the comment about driving?
You know, cars are expensive, but they strangely appear. So, I mean, not for all families, but often families get supported by some very generous people in the community to get cars. Most families are not two-car families, though. So if there is a car in the house, it pretty much always is not going to the woman in the house. And it goes the same for phones. If there is a phone in the house, it's often not going to the women. So if there's funding from an agency for phones, that's not going to the women often. So that is something that we see play out. Yeah, I'm not sure I answered your question, but yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So my question is for Chloe. Immigrants and refugees who usually come to the United States have this cultural shock, especially with the institutions and the services that are provided in the United States are very much different. They don't have those types of services, hospitals, bankings. So what does the organization provide in teaching or practicing for them to learn these services here?
It's a good question. So all of the refugee resettlement agencies do something called cultural orientation when people first arrive. But my experience of it is when you first arrive, you're spinning, and it's really hard to focus on a lot of information that's been given to you. And it'll be, wear deodorant in the same thing as don't hit your children in the same session. You know, it's a lot of information, cultural information that is being given to people. So one of the things that we do in our women's empowerment group is we follow up in depth with things. So for example, in fact, Fahim, your wife can attend because it's on Zoom in the next session. We're doing a session on bank accounts and the importance of bank accounts and not keeping money under your mattress, for example. So we will be doing a session on that in our women's empowerment group. And we're not preaching to anybody, we're just sharing information and people can do with it as they think. So we cover domestic abuse, financial abuse, immigration abuse, regression in children who've been through trauma and stress, how to behave in certain situations like, you know, job interviews, those kind of things. So we cover it all in a lot more detail in a women's empowerment group. But we are one group with a limited number of women in them, and there definitely needs to be a lot more work done to support the community with the issues that you're raising.
Okay, I think we probably just have time for one more question over here.
It's just related to the last question. How do you manage some of the cultural differences linked to religious practice that in a time of stress become very, very critical to the emotional survival of people? And I'm thinking about banking and how different our banking system is to their way of processing how to handle funds. They many cannot engage with institutions that charge interest. How do you explain to them that they will have to make an adjustment if they are to survive or to use at least our financial system?
We don't do anything more than just explain things quietly, I think would be a good way of putting it. We specifically in our group do not talk about religion and we do not talk about politics. So those are two things that we do not cover. And in our WhatsApp group, everyone's got one, which is our main source for communicating. We don't let politics or religion get commented on. But really, you know, a lot of it is peer group. So, you know, for example, we were talking in one of our conversation groups about whether men can look after children. So some of the women were like, there's no way that, you know, that my children wouldn't survive the day, kind of thing. But some of the other women were going, oh, but my husband looks after the kids. So, and it was being discussed amongst the women, 20 Afghan women discussing it, chatting about it, laughing about it. And those kind of peer group conversations are quite impactful.
Well, again, specifically with regard to the banking part of this, this is good.
We cover things like debt. Like, let's talk about debt. Let's talk about interest rates. Let's talk about buying a car. But for our Afghan women, that's something that we won't tackle probably in the first year. It's something that we will tackle later on. Yeah.
I just wanted to mention in the Middle East, the banking structure, it's run by Sharia law, which is Islamic finance. We think that the banking system here is complicated. As Sharia banking system, financial institutions is something very, very difficult to comprehend. So from most of my friends that have moved here from the Middle East, and including Afghanistan, they find the structure here a lot more simple. It is elaborate, but it makes sense. It makes a lot more sense to them. So fortunately, there hasn't been too many issues in regards to that because there's a structure, there's a system, and it's not, you know, one day, you know, because of, you know, what the mullah says, everything's going to change in the Islamic system.
Did you want to add like a two-finger to that comment, or did you have a separate question?
I wanted to get a perspective of scale. How many refugees, how many Afghans are in the city of Houston right now?
So we counted just over 5,000 as far as I understand, but maybe Chloe has a more accurate estimate or up-to-date estimate.
5,000 is what we've heard. It's one of the top destinations for Afghan
Of those who came most recently, right? This is not including those who had lived here
No.
previously.
Like a registry of all the names and their, like, all of their information?
That's a good question, actually.
You do, okay.
Yes.
Do you guys have like a database of like the strengths of like what their backgrounds are with terms of work related for the men and the women?
So we have case files that we keep, and we have to be, it's all audited, so it has to be really specific. So if somebody speaks to our employment team, or if they speak to another member of our team, it's all recorded. Medical team, exactly what's going on, it'll all be on that audited database.
And of the 5,000, it's been about maybe less than a year, just less than a year. Do you guys know how many have jobs, or how many have gotten jobs, or where they're at in that, from that scale? Imagine, like you guys said, it's probably very difficult to get a job, and there's, the labor force right now is very strong. So, you know, what communication is there to show out to the labor force? There's 5,000 people here, maybe not 5,000, but maybe 1,000 that can work and get jobs.
I don't know. If
So I can just speak for our agency. So our agency has resettled nearly 1,400 refugees. Sorry, I keep on saying refugees, Afghan parolees, and we don't have percentages on them, but historically for all of our other refugees who've come in, who've been in the same sort of situations in terms of language skills and skill sets, all those kind of things, we see a success rate of 94% within 6 months. And our biggest focus as an agency, not the biggest focus as the women's group, but the biggest focus as an agency is self-sufficiency. We have to get people self-sufficient within a quicker time as possible.
Okay, great. You know, Erin, I'm okay. Last question from Erin.
A real quick comment. You talked a lot about people getting involved as volunteers, but to pick up on what this gentleman said, if you are hiring or you're offering jobs, or you know people that would like to offer jobs to refugees, you can reach out to the refugee agencies, and they're always looking for people willing to hire Afghans.
Okay, that's a great comment to end on. Sorry, everyone else that has burning questions. We're going to have to end at this point. But yes, let's give a final round of thanks to our panelists. If I can also, if you don't mind, please just take a moment to also thank our events team for putting this together, our AV team, Anna Marta Gill, our program coordinator at the Center